Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching KTN Prime, and my name is Leon Gare. We have an interesting discussion tonight, reflections from the recent by-elections. So many key issues highlighted from the recent by-elections, from public trust, political interference, and voter participation being said to remain major concerns, even as Kenya prepares for the 2027 general election. I have an able panel here. Very excited to have all of you. How are you all feeling?
Good.
Sheila looking lovely.
Thank you very much.
You all also look good. This must Well, to my right, very close by, is Martin Olo, who is a political analyst. And we have also Sheila Olang, who is an economist and governance expert. And we have Dismas Mokua, who is a political analyst. Thank you so much for making time today. I'll just begin by having us look at some super bowls that my producer produced, just to give us context on some of the key issues we'll be talking about. And I'll just allow my team there to run some of those super bowls, just highlighting key issues on the hits, talking about KM's hits working at 99% efficiency during the November 27th by-elections. Of course, also IEBC saying current systems make rigging nearly impossible, something that has remained contentious for some of the leaders in the political scene. And of course, we have election logistics, training and result transmission said to be generally successful. And we'll just begin with those particular figures there. Of course, not to mention some of the challenges that the IEBC mentioned is low voter turnout and growing public mistrust in elections, and not forgetting political interference and intimidation of election officials reported in several areas, and also presence of super agents attempting to influence processes, issues with misinformation and isolated security incidents. We'll come back to those details there from the super walls. But I just want us to begin by just listening to your reflections, some of the things that the IEBC talked about yesterday in the forum, and key issues like I've mentioned, public trust, political interference. But before we go to some of the reflections from yesterday, how about you give me your reflections on the recent by-elections? And I'll begin with you, Martin Olo.
Were there by-elections? Yes, there were by-elections in terms of declarations. But were they elections, or were they an exercise in political thuggery and political foul play? I mean, what we saw, both in terms of the deployment of state resources and the kind of people who are campaigning, the state agencies who are campaigning, the fact that the executive decided to pour everything, CSS, PSS, and all pseudo civil servants in this fray. It was no election as we know it. It was the executive flexing muscle and imposing itself on people and wanting a result. So you were in Malava and you camped there for months on end. What were you doing? It's not campaign time. They had not, the IEBC had not even declared, but the campaigns were going on. Or you're in Beere and you have this guy who we don't know whether his name is this or the other. His identity is in question, but he is the candidate. So basically, I want to say that in terms of what we were seeing in the by-elections, it was the state flexing its muscle and trying to prove that it needs, or it wants to show its might, and therefore to determine what the outcome of the election would be. So when you come out and there's bloodshed and nobody's condemning it, when you come out and there's open bribery, nobody's condemning it, when you come out and there's obvious interference with the electoral processes, even IEBC is not condemning it. So really, we did not have what you'd call a kind of a prep of what you would see in 2027, though people have argued that that is what we'll have. And if we'll have that, then one thing that we must also be ready for is that a lot of Kenyans will be very uncomfortable, and a lot of Kenyans may not go to the ballot, and a lot of Kenyans will say, this is not what my life is about. Otherwise, elections are supposed to be a very easy process, a point at which people make choices, and you can decide this is your person or this is not your person, and you live together, because at the end of the day, nobody, whoever loses, whoever wins, is still coming back to us So once the game is over, we should be able to talk to each other and we should be able to coexist. But not what we saw. What we saw was either you lose or I win. So that kind of game doesn't work out in terms of what you'd say a fair play, what you'd say democracy. It is now chest thumping, it is might, it is money, and it is violence.
Sheila, listening to what Martin has to say, of course, mentioning the use of state machinery, he calls this by-election that happened recently not really an election. But what are your thoughts?
My biggest concern with the elections that we recently had was that of voter apathy. If we look at the numbers from 2022 alone, we could see that a big chunk of registered voters, we have a third that just did not show up. A lot of them happen to also coincidentally be young people. And what we saw, if this is in any way a dress rehearsal for 2027, was a case where it was more of a test of ego more than anything else. And the fear of that is one of security, and then the second one is voter apathy. Why do I say this? I say this because someone could argue, well, who cares? If you don't vote, then whoever will vote will vote. But listen, if you fail to have a majority show up at your election, you decrease your validity as a winner. What does this mean? I always like reflecting on 2022, where we had two major presidential candidates. You had the current president now, and then you had the late Honorable Raila on the ballot. Plus or minus, there was a good 7 million here, 7 million there, and then there was just this huge other third bubble that was kind of left out there. And if you ask me, if you do the analysis well, you'll see that it is probably this bubble that felt that none of these two represented their interest that were out on the streets last year complaining. And that's what I mean when I say that you have to ensure that elections are free, fair, and accessible and secure. The minute you fail to do this, a lot of women vote. No women are going to show up to the polls if they are deemed to be a dangerous exercise to do. So you will end up being elected, but you will end up not having the mandate or the confidence from the people to lead them. And we don't want that to happen. So IEBC in many ways was being tested to say, hey, we have a huge trust deficit in this country, as it is. And IEBC is one of the leading institutions that the citizenship always feels like they cannot trust them. So this, unfortunately, was an opportunity for IEBC to really show that, listen, we can get the job done, we can do it fairly. But I wouldn't 100% blame IEBC. I mean, in many ways, sometimes their hands were tied. Because you had all these senior politicians who were pulling off all the stops. I mean, it was the level of intimidation was just a bit too ridiculous. You know, when you have, on average, a lot of these seats had, let's say, 7 candidates each. And then you have one candidate who is getting so much state resources, and we have not gotten into the conversation of, is this legal, is this not legal? Because it's not very clear that they're supposed to be that involved in elections, people who are sitting in civil servants who are sitting in office. That's a different discussion. But you have this going to a small constituency or even a small ward. I mean, we saw Ward West, like, the senior politicians were there and camping and doing all kinds of things. And what it ends up really doing is just, it's contributing to this trust deficit. It's contributing to voter apathy. So I think it's a moment of reflection that if this is what we're going to have in 2027, then we're in for a very rude shock. We're going to have a big problem. Because it cannot be, elections are not about egos. Elections are about us exercising our constitutional rights.
All right. Dismas, listening to what Sheila has to say, of course, mentioning issues of we can't entirely blame the IEBC. Very key issue there that you've mentioned, Sheila, of voter apathy, and which was highlighted as something that's very critical for the next election, the 2027 general election. But just to listen to your views, Dismas, what do you make of some of the key things I know Martin has mentioned and Sheila, and just highlighting the performance of the IEBC?
Now, Sheila and Martin have raised very fundamental issues. The first one, the chairman yesterday indicated that there was very poor turnout, especially among the young people. And these are the guys who are expected to mold Kenya's future. But when it came to the by-elections, they were no show. And the people who turned out, according to the chairman, were mature or elderly. He didn't give the age. But again, he said out of the ones who turned out, the ones majority were women. So it appears that as we make progress as a nation, it's actually old women who will be taking decisions for Kenyans. And the young Kenyans who the last 2 years have been very vocal, wanting very clear change, they've forgotten that you can have this change in Kenya by going through the ballot box. That is the first observation. Then the second observation, which is unacceptable, is political violence. You had goons spread in almost every place where there was an election. Now, the moment you have many goons, then you invite law enforcement attention. So the Inspector General, when they pick intelligence that there is going to be political violence somewhere, he will deploy law enforcement officers. And what does that do? It's some sort of, one can say that it's a voter suppression strategy. Because when you wake up in the morning and you see some policemen outside your door, then you don't have the guts to go and cast your ballot. And then also at the same time, if the IG does not deploy policemen, people will again complain that there was no security. And then the third one, and this one I think is a threat to our national security, the levels of misinformation and disinformation were just amazing, especially from the so-called united opposition. Because one remembers Mr. Rigathi Gachagua indicating that they've got credible evidence that there's going to be rigging. But one would have expected that when Mr. Gachagua says that there's going to be rigging, you present evidence. Now, when you make those allegations, and you know Rigathi Gachagua's brand of toxic politics, people swallow his lies easily. There are people who may have want to go and cast their ballots, but will not show up because they'll say, this election is already predetermined. So people refuse to go and exercise their agency. So in my view, what IEBC must do as a matter of agency, and we have said these times above number, and in good part the buck stops with them. They have to reassure, I mean, the chairman said yesterday that it's impossible to rig an election in Kenya, especially a by-election, but they must go to the top of Mount Kenya and clearly paint for us that picture. The systems they've created, the predictable systems for unpredictable outcomes, so that the people, even when there is a misinformation and disinformation, people can still show up. People can go and cast their ballots. But in the absence of that, then it's going to be at all order. And then finally, having had the meeting that yesterday, one would expect that the law enforcement officers would go the extra mile and pick out the architects of political violence, the actual people who are in the violence, the Jolwedos, the Kandayamoko, the people who engaged in the actual violence, but more important, the people gave them resources. Because if you don't do that, then again, why would somebody want to lose a limb 2027 on account of a politician? People may refuse to show up. So at this stage, the IEBC must work with law enforcement officers and indeed all other stakeholders in the electoral process so that in 2027, people turn out in good numbers to cast their ballots, and then they do this without any fear or intimidation.
Well, despite the youth, of course, being the dominant force in the voter register, like you've mentioned, they appeared to be very low in numbers for the turnout. But yet the IEBC says that the youth bear a very, very critical role in making sure that the election process is not hindered, and of course that the election does paint the voice of the nation. I just want to hear from you, when it comes to voter apathy, what kind of impact do you think this will have in the 2027 general election, Martin?
First of all, let's admit that by-elections, by their very nature, tend to reflect the issue of voter apathy, because the heat, the interest, the passion around by-elections does not always generate sufficient voters to turn out. So generally, by-elections in this country attract less voters. Two, the issue about the youth, and this is something that we must talk to. It is time the youth realize that by them not playing part or taking part in voting, they are actually allowing the minority who are actually the older generation, and particularly we've even said they are even people of a particular gender, that, you know, the people who are ready to take the bribe and the people who are ready to commit to vote after taking the bribe or after taking the sugar or after taking the leso or whatever it is that are likely the older generation that are more faithful, that once they have taken your token, they are actually going to come. Now, what it also says that the younger people will come, participate, will make noise, might even get some handouts, but most likely on the day of the voting, they'll not turn up. What does that say? It says that then the majority are allowing the minority to make decisions when it is not in their best interest. Because talk to any politician, they will not invest, even in a border guy or any youth, they would rather invest in the ladies or in the older folks, because they know these people, once they tell you they will do it, they'll do it. And then in the age of goonism or in the current state of insecurity, all that you need to do is to provide security for your voters, particularly the elderly persons, ensure they go and vote. And you know, we should know these things. When you want the elderly to vote, is you gather them the night before or at some point, then you are shepherding them to the station with the security, and they go and vote. And the younger people most likely are excited about other things. Maybe they imbibed a few other things in the course of the night. They might wake up or might not wake up, but by the time they wake up, it's about
closing
or the other side. And that is not what you want in an election. Now, it's okay to say the by-election is reflecting that, but also our general election reflects that the fidelity, the faithfulness of the older folks, once they have committed or have been, compromised, if you use that term, they always will deliver. And so a good politician will know where to invest and where not to invest, because they'll say the youth will make the noise, but they are hardly going to wake up and do it. Now, the time for them to change is now, and that's why I always like having Sheila with me, because then Sheila must keep reminding the younger people in this country that they cannot just talk about issues, they must act on the issues. Otherwise, the older folks are going to continue in their old ways, and I want to say in the old bad ways. And if they do that, the people will not benefit, the people will be disadvantaged, are the younger people. And so it's time they took up responsibility.
I want us to take a short break, and when we come back, I have one question about the by-elections, because as you say, Martin, the by-elections may not have had a high turnout because that's been the norm in the country. Does that speak into maybe the interests of the young people, or maybe perhaps they do not have sufficient information to understand the significance of these by-elections? But we'll come back to that. Right now, though, I want us to take a short break, and when we return, we continue with this conversation. So stay tuned. Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching KTN Prime, and tonight's discussion, of course, we are with a great panel here. We have Martin Olo to my right, who is a political analyst, and we have Sheila Olang, who is an economist and governance expert, and of course also Dismas Mukua, who is a political analyst. And before we took a break, I know Martin was talking about the by-elections and perhaps why the youth do not feel like it's very relevant for them, and that's why the voter turnout perhaps was also low. But I was asking the question, the by-elections, are they not also important? And I was pointing that question now to Sheila. Maybe is it that the youth do not understand that this by-election also matters, or is it perhaps this by-election didn't have any kind of prominence?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think like Martin said, from the beginning, by-elections generally have a low voter turnout. I was giving an example of many folks I know who will vote in the countryside, and then they live in the urban areas. So this is not a place where you would expect just to go, let's say have your by-election for an MP or maybe an MCA, that you'd see, folks traveling, let's say from Nairobi going all the way to Shags just to vote. That wasn't really happening. So that was, of course, a contributing factor. So in general, by-elections have a lower voter turnout. That is just the reality of it. Now, I know then it begs the question, oh, youth, we are not going to show up because we didn't even show up now anyway. But I think let's try to hold our horses a little bit. This was not a good reflection of what will happen, because the people that the youth, if you think about last year when the youth came out to protest and fight, who were they agitating against? Those people were not on the ballot today. And I think it's also an incentive or disincentivizing going to fight, because the people that they were very, very busy going against were their MPs who were busy passing bills they didn't like, and it was also, the executive and the rest of it. These people were never on the ballot in the first place. So I don't think thinking that, the way the by-elections have turned out, I know we have a bad reputation of not voting. That's fine. I'll take that. I'll take one for the team. But I know Prof is happy. I've decided to I'll take one for the team. Prof, we are working on this, because today taking IDs is free. You can just go register and get your IDs. So just let them underestimate it. I think it's good. We're underdogs. It's fine, but we're coming. The people who are making us upset, their pictures will be on that ballot in 2027. Then we're going to come out and say, you need to go home. So that will happen. I think at the end of it all is that if you looked at the grassroots, what happened at grassroots level, I think maybe the parliamentary ones are not the best reflections. Look at the MCAs that were elected. Look at the resources that were poured. I think, let's say in Western, an MCA, there's a DCP MCA who won in Western. Kisa East, where you had the speaker who was there campaigning. And you still tell me there's nothing going on at grassroots. Those are more the reflective ones now. If you start look at the MCA ones, and then you'll see what the country is feeling and the directions that they're going, and the fact that all these resources were pumped in there. That is not a normal occurrence in Western Kenya, that you would have a DCP MCA. Not really. It usually doesn't happen that way. And that should not be taken lightly. So again, the people who made us upset last year and took us to parliament, they were not on that ballot, but their faces are coming in 27. I can tell you 90% of them will go home.
I just want to move away from voter apathy just for a bit. We'll come back to that. The issue of security and the issue, of course, of the democratic process, Kenyans feeling, we can trust the IEBC to deliver a credible election. We do have faith in the democratic process of this country. Do you think Kenyans have faith in the IEBC, Dismas? And do they trust that we can, that the IEBC rather can deliver a credible election? Because there were accusations on the IEBC that perhaps this recent by-election, the results were not credible, and that coming from, of course, some of the leaders. What do you think about this?
I think there's a dotted line. When you talk about IEBC's capacity and competence to deliver a free and fair election, there's no debate. And lawyers, the ones who specialize in electoral matters, have indicated that for you to have a petition today and win against IEBC, especially in a general election, it's very, very complicated. The majority of the petitions IEBC has won because they stick to the procedures. The kind of legal framework we have is very tight. The only challenge that IEBC has faced is managing the trust deficit or crisis so that people know exactly what is happening. Now, when the people know exactly what is happening, then you will increase the confidence levels. And then also the law enforcement officers have to use the architects of these by-election as examples, so that before 2027, whoever paid goons, and those goons, if they face the full force of the law, then people will know this is not acceptable. In fact, they need to review the legal framework so that if you participate in political violence, it should be treated as a high crime, as murder. Because why are you stopping me from going to cast my ballot? Now, that is linked to voter apathy. And in tax, they say you pay tax where you are domiciled. Now, for some reason, you remember at some stage, Michael Joseph was accused of calling Kenyans peculiar consumers of Safaricom products. Now, the Kenyan voter is typically peculiar as well. Most Kenyans work in urban areas, but they're registered in the villages. So there's no incentive for them to travel during a by-election to go and vote back in the village. And also, by-elections are not public holidays in Kenya. So if you're a banker, if you teach at Daystar, are you going to sacrifice your 3-4 days to go to the village, cast your ballot, and come back? So in my view, Kenyans need to vote where they're domiciled. And it's a foul language, but you need to vote where your abolition facilities are located, where you spend most of your time. So Like Sheila, because you spend most of your time in Nairobi, you must vote in Nairobi. We don't want people to say that we are going back to the villages. That is number one. And then number two, the people who are interested in these by-elections also offer, a glimpse on the turnout. Like, for instance, during the by-elections in Kisii, you had some MPs understand, or there are allegations, that they kept the company of thugs. And these are thugs that had weapons, which is unacceptable. So when you know there are some people, and these MPs are linked to the state, according to the statements are made, that they had weapons. So people would fear. In fact, in part, it explains why the former CS Ezekiel Machogu had a field day, ensuring that the candidates of his choice won the election. Then still using Kisii as an example, for the by-elections which took place in Nyamira, you had people from Kisii County campaigning in Nyamira. So people say, wait a minute, are there no sons and daughters in this county to campaign? When you go through the papers, people are saying there were some popular guys like Jared Ongwae who should have been campaigning in Nyamira, but they were not given resources. And one can talk about the same in Mbere. You saw what happened, that you have somebody who has served as the Speaker of the National Assembly, somebody who has served in very senior roles, engaging in acts which can be described as political violence. You saw him literally running, trying to beat up a young man. And this is what you are talking about, the super agent. So when people say, wait a minute, Mr. Muturi, what are you doing here? He said, I'm a party leader. I'm supposed to be here. You see, now, if you have that kind of attitude towards this thing, then people would say, who am I to go and face a party leader head on? This gentleman now has served as the Attorney General, as a Speaker. He probably knows law more than everybody else. So if he's doing this thing, then it could be right. But at the end of the day, and this is the Sheila's domain, we must vote with our selfish interest in mind. Unfortunately, most of the time in Kenya, we vote with the politicians' selfish interest in mind. We don't care that if they go to office, they're going to sort our issues. They've given us unga, they've given us cabbage, and we think that that is something very unique, and we are aligned to their interests. We don't know that if you don't have some of the sharpest tools in the shed, in the National Assembly and Senate, they will not even understand the issue. And this by-election has given us some sort of insights that there are few people in Kenya who appreciate the role of meritocracy and others don't. Like, for instance, if you talk about Malava, you would easily say that the UDA candidate embraces meritocracy. But I'm not sure whether the same can be said of other candidates. I mean, for instance, if you've got multiple names, your name has been associated with scandals, why would people still want to vote you to office? We keep on comparing ourselves to Singapore, South Korea, all these other countries, but the difference is people in those countries, they place a huge value in meritocracy. That for you to be elected, you must have character, capacity, and competence. In Kenya, sometimes we sacrifice those three. Sometimes we sacrifice character. So you vote in guys with capacity and competence, and as soon as they go to office, their first order of business, hapa tunatengeneza pesaje, hapa tunatengeneza pesaje. That is why they flood these by-elections with resources. In fact,
but is there ever any candidate that at any given point that Kenyans can say this one is someone with the values that you're talking about, someone who has integrity, someone who is truthful, and someone who's dependable? I tend to think perhaps Kenyans just have to weigh, this is what we have, but let's go for the quote unquote, the lesser evil. Do you think that's the case?
Let me just complete that point. Yesterday, a party which got a beating in South Africa, the ANC, were reflecting on the reason why they've been going south. Every election, they've been losing their grip. And their Secretary General, a gentleman called Mbalula, came to the conclusion is because ANC has been flaunting wealth. The people, for some reason, the moment you become an ANC member, then you've got an elective office, money comes in truckloads. Now, and the supporters have been the urban poor. So when you go to the urban poor with choppers, SUVs, all these top-of-the-range shoes, this kind of suits, this kind of phones, then the people say back, okay, wait a minute. So is this how you're applying for a job? Now, Kenyans want good governance. Kenyans want good leaders. And Kenyans know who is a good leader. But for some reason, because now the Kenyan voter is peculiar, because majority of us are emotional and irrational, we know the good candidates. But when we go to the ballot box, all of a sudden, I remember that I'm a Kisii man, I remember I'm a Maasai man, I remember that I come from the mountain, and then I sacrifice meritocracy, I sacrifice character, capacity, and competence, then I say mtu wetu ama mtu wangu.
Martin, your thoughts on this? Why do you think then Kenyans have this kind of trend when it comes to electing their leaders?
I wanted to help us to grant Kenyans some level of intelligence. Our common voter has an idea about the politician. They are transactional. Kenyan, the voter is transactional, the politician is transactional. They know this guy is only coming for our vote. After he's gotten our vote, he's going to disappear. So they get the most out of that person at that point. And they demand it, they insist they have to be given, and they are given. And they know, even when they are getting 500, 200, whatever, they know this guy is going to disappear. So it's a transaction that happens during elections. And the Kenyan voter is fairly intelligent. He knows these fellows. And they also know that this character who is coming here to flaunt this world doesn't have values, doesn't have integrity. They know. So they transact, take as much as they can, and they know the guy will disappear, he'll go do his things, and they say, fine, we'll meet again after 5 years. So what are we saying? We are saying that this is not about values, or if it's about values, they are not the values we would want to think are the national values we put in our constitution. And because of that, we also need to appreciate where we are at. When you have poverty ravaging, and when you have situations where we know for sure there's no trust between us and our leaders, then it is transactional. Tumalizane. Yeah? Let us deal with each other today because we know you. Once you get this thing, you'll go away. So that is our state. And even when you look at how we are dealing with each other, whether at national, whether at lower level, the voter knows that the politician does not have their interest. And the politicians also know the voter only has their interest. For that reason, nobody cares about Kenya. In fact, Kenya is on its own. Everybody in Kenya has a bit of their selfish need here, a bit of their selfish need there. We meet somewhere in a transaction. So basically what I'm saying is that we are yet to even begin to talk about what elections mean. You've just given an example. ANC was that epitome of the fight for democracy, the fight for emancipation of the people. But when they took power, they became comfortable with the power. You can say that of Kenya Kwanza. They told us, look, it's about bottom up. We want to bring up Mwamboga. We want to bring up that. Everybody knows that was a slogan they used to get elected. Once they got elected, they were comfortable. They say, you know, Shah here, what there, sell this. So you can see that they are disconnected. But the transactional conversation worked for them. I'm sure they are coining something as they think of 2027. They'll come back and Kenyans will again be with them and they might be able to convince or otherwise. But basically what we are saying is that we are, and by the way, democracy is actually facing a big pushback. When you look at what's happening globally, democracy is on its deathbed. Earlier on when he was talking about IEBC, and IEBC saying they are playing by the rules, it's difficult to find them at fault. That may be true. But you see, if you're looking at it from just following what the law is saying, technicalities, like, you know, they can come and say, you see, we could not do anything, there are politicians who are responsible, the big people who are bribing. That is a lame excuse from IEBC. When you have a referee who is saying, I mean, imagine a referee between Manchester United and Arsenal saying that, you know, these big guys, I could not do anything, you know, they were just stepping on each other, they were just fouling each other, there's nothing I could do. That's a very lame referee. That's a referee who does not know what the business of refereeing is.
And that raises definitely some concern there on what I mentioned earlier on, the confidence that Kenyans have in the IEBC being able to carry out a credible election and deliver credible results. And that question coming to you, Sheila, because I know Martin raises very, very critical questions on democracy, critical questions on Kenyans choosing to elect a leader, saying, okay, I'll go for whoever I can go for as long as I get some money now, but for the next 5 years, they have to deal with some of the issues we are experiencing right now. So just to take us into the democratic part of this whole conversation, what do you make of the confidence that Kenyans, at this time, they say they're not very confident with what the IEBC is able to deliver come 2027? And just a question as well, how far or to what extent does the IEBC have the mandate to make sure that an election is free and fair? Issues of insecurity and goons that we witnessed, what kind of considerable power does the IEBC have to speak into these issues?
So I think we can start off with, legally speaking, what is the mandate of IEBC in terms of on matters security? So IEBC is legally supposed to ensure security until 400 meters away from a polling station. Again, 400 meters. So whatever incident is occurring outside of the 400 meters, it now falls into the security apparatus. It no longer falls into IEBC's lap. So what does this say? This says that our security apparatus must work very closely with IEBC because, you know, to us, if I was coming from my house that was 500 meters away and I got an incident just before I caught the 400-meter mark where IEBC then kicks in, I mean, it just becomes ridiculous in the end when we start pointing fingers, no, you're supposed to, you're supposed to. What will happen is that if we do not address the issue of goons and setting up paramilitary forces within election periods, then there will be nothing like IEBC and free and fair. We might as well forget about it. If IEBC and the security forces cannot sit down at one table and decide what they want to do about this issue of security, then we might as well just be wasting time, because the amount of lawlessness that was seen in the by-election, and by lawlessness, I just mean every single person on both sides of the aisle, nobody was innocent in this, coming up with goons that were even overpowering, overshadowing the security apparatus.
We actually had yesterday politician Cleophas Malala saying, well, these are just accusations on the police that perhaps they were working together with the goons and they had control, according to his remarks,
it's
over the goons.
Yes, and the accusation is on both sides. Then we had, in Kasipul, for example, the independent candidate who did not seemingly have state backing or state machinery was being accused of, you know, there was an MP who was being attacked who said, but the police are watching me being attacked. It becomes very confusing. It's very blurry. You can't even accuse the government, or you cannot accuse opposition or the independent candidate of who's doing what. And that is lawlessness. And just to give a little brief about why this matters, we've had countries go into war of this issue of just hiring goons in an economy where people do not have their daily needs met. And that's why for me, it always boils down to, I tell them, between now and 2027, it is the economy, babe. It's the economy. If we do not figure out how to provide for somebody, and then you come and you offer me 500 shillings for the day for a gig to stand at the gate of a police, I won't even remember to go and vote myself. But I'll stand in front of that gate, and my job is to what? Intimidate the next person coming so they don't do it. Then I get paid my 500 shillings. If you think about it, it's a question of poverty. It's a question of a cycle of poverty. It's the fact that the political class must be hell-bent on maintaining this cycle of poverty in order to continue perpetuating this kind of dependency that you're seeing. Now, let's also, I know Prof is all gloom and doom, but I like reminding him that last year we tried, Prof. Last year we tried to call out, what was happening. Yes, because last year there was a clear difference between there's the political class and then there's the rest of us. And last year, it started off by sounding the alarm, saying, we don't like that. You're representing us. One of your jobs is representing us, you know, in Parliament. Don't pass it. And they came out laughing and said, what are you talking about? We do what we want. Because they're always used to getting away with everything. But look at what happened when they never listened. And that's why I think this particular Parliament that we're looking at today will look very different in 2027. Look very different just by the mere fact that they forgot what representation looks like. And so it's a warning because nobody wants anarchy. Because what is the solution here? You cannot go up against state resources and then say you're going to kick out, a whole government. And anarchy for us, we love Kenya. Anarchy is not an option. So everybody must come to the table and everyone must find a workable solution. The people who vote the most are women, older women. They don't have the capacity to fight goons or whoever else you want to put there. They must be secured, they must be reassured, and then they must be kept safe so that they can then come out and vote. Now, to the second point about democracy. Democracy is interesting because I've studied a lot about, in terms of governance, to understand, the prevailing way of running everything in the world today is democracy, but you ask yourself, well, where did that even come from? Some scholars say it came from the times of the French Revolution, where everybody came and stood up against the Meritocracy, and they said, well, we've had enough, we don't want a monarchy system, now we want to be able to represent ourselves. And sometimes we inherit these systems and without thinking or reflecting, well, what does it look like for us? And now there's been a lot of scholars who are actually trying to look at countries that are quasi-democratic because they're realizing that there's a limit to democracy. There's a limit to democracy, especially a limit to perceived democracy, because we call ourselves democratic, but are we really democratic in the end? If you have this high level of voter apathy, if you have this high level of intimidation and suppression, where are you getting your validity from? Where are you getting the power and the mandate from? So it is in the interest even of the political class to make sure that you get as much of your, as many voters as possible giving you that job. Then you can confidently say, I represent this ward, or I represent this county, because, I had, of all the registered voters in this county, I was able to get X number of turnout, and then X number was able to vote and validate me. So you have a certain air of confidence in saying, I am truly representing the place where I come from. But unless we change that, then we'll end up with a country that is so fragile in terms of governance that we're always risking dropping down into anarchy. We're always risking another 2024 constantly, and that's not good for us.
As you push this issue of democracy is in a name. Orange Democratic, United Democratic Alliance, those are names. Democratic Republic of Congo. It has nothing to do with what happens on the ground.
It's naming, it's branding. It's a branding exercise.
Sort of like a PR. Okay, Dismas, when you listen, I'm just listening to what Sheila is saying, issues on the IEBC. Of course, we had the IEBC officials saying, hey, the police, there are accusations on the police, but as much as we know that there are these cases of voter bribery reported, cases of violence that were witnessed, we do not have the power to carry out arrests. That's what the IEBC is saying.
They don't prosecute.
And they don't need to.
They don't prosecute.
Where does that place us as a country if the IEBC is saying it doesn't have influence on that, and the police are saying, of course, we don't have anything to do with the goons, but nothing like this will happen again in 2027 under the watch.
The back stops with the...
There is the issue of demarcation, but the security of this country still remains in the hands of the National Police Service and the state generally. So you cannot abdicate it. And neither can even IEBC say they want power to arrest. Neither can they say they want power to prosecute. That has been determined in the Constitution. The DPP prosecutes, the National Police Service investigates, and they prefer charges. And so that is an arrangement that we know. So IEBC should not be telling us they want to prosecute, they want to arrest. No. And neither should the National Police be telling us that they have no power, they cannot do anything. That's abdication.
Yeah. In my view, what IEBC must do, because the buck stops with them, is to bring together all these actors and on a regular basis do scenario analysis and sensitivity analysis so every player understands what their role is supposed to be. Because if you keep on passing the buck, then that becomes a threat to national security. You cannot keep on passing the buck and saying, this is not my responsibility, that is not my responsibility. Like you remember when the anti-corruption commissioners got challenges with their files, they say, give us powers to prosecute. Now, that will not solve anything. So the Inspector General of Police must be very proactive and know that the buck stops with him. So he must work with the IEBC and ensure that everything works. That is number one. Then number two, we must develop a very high appetite of questioning politicians when they make statements. Like for instance, as we indicated earlier on, a few days before the election, when a number of senior prominent politicians said there's going to be rigging and there's going to be, that the ballots are being stuffed somewhere, we should take them to task and tell them, can you give us evidence? Because if there's going to be an election in Kasipul Kabondo and you're already telling me it's rigged and I'm a voter, then why should I bother coming? That is number 2. Number 3, there must be very heavy pecuniary and criminal penalties on anybody who wants to sabotage election. Still using Kasipul Kabondo as an example, people were given, some candidates were given a penalty of $1 million bob. For them, that is a drop of water in the ocean. I mean, you're going to cause political violence, and the fine is only $1 million bob. For some of these guys with, we are told, with unlimited resources. So, they can still do it because they know I can organize political violence as a voter suppression strategy, but what's the penalty? $1 million bob only. So they'll have the $1 million bob on there ready.
And then finally, close to a discussion. I just want to hear from, but you can just finish your point, Dismas.
Yeah. And finally, we must pay attention to politicians who call a spade a spade. For some reason, we've got an irrational love and appetite for politicians who lie. So a politician comes for a by-election and is promising to build a bridge, there is no river. It's promising to do things which for a fact is not going to deliver. You recall after Kenya Kwanza took office, the PCS Musalia Mudavadi said the economy is limping. It's going to take us up to 3 years before we can do policy corrections. Then people started, sat back and rolled their eyes and said, what is Musalia talking about? But he's calling a spade, and people want to punish him for calling a spade a spade.
Right.
But you get people coming to lie to us.
From all of you, I'm going to give you 15 seconds. 20 seconds, let me give you at most, because we need to come to a close. But just give me your final remarks about today's discussion. Some of the key issues we've mentioned, just your sentiments in 15 seconds.
Well, we've talked about rigging, we've talked about politicians and lying. That is what politics is about. Lie, lie, lie until you are believed. So when Kenya Kwanza tells you something, no, they are lying. When the alternative, when you say the opposition are saying there's going to be rigging, no, they are lying. So lies and politics are bedfellows. If you are not ready to lie, don't get into politics. Ask any of these guys inside this business. Even the voters know they are being lied to. So lies are what is the currency for politics.
Let's hear from Sheila.
Mine is more on a positive note, actually, just to urge young people, go out, get your IDs, register to vote.
And learn to lie.
Yeah, register to vote. And because remember that this is the only opportunity we have to actually make a difference. It might look like there's a lot of trust issues that is going on. A lot needs to be clean and cleared out. But I think our love for this country, and we have proven it time and time again that we can show up for this country and say that we want to head it in the right direction. So don't be too discouraged. Go out, take your registration. That is the best weapon that you're going to use to fight that battle in 2027.
All right.
I'll only asking whether by-elections are consequential. Indeed, they are, because President Kenyatta used by-elections to launch his political career. President Ruto, when he was a deputy, used by-elections. And that is why the Malava and the Mbere elections were very clear, because had Kenya Kwanza lost, then Mr. Rigathi Gachagua would be dancing to the bank. But his bubble has been busted. Because, he had told people, I've got the Mount Kenya vote in my back pocket, but after Mbere, things are thick.
All right. Thank you so much for making time. Quite an insightful discussion we've had tonight, and I'd love to have you again just to shed more light for the electorate. Of course, it's very important. It's important. Martin doesn't like coming at night, but we'll still call you again to come at night. Thank you for making time. Martin Olo, political analyst. To my right, in the middle there is Sheila Olang, who is a governance and economist expert, and of course, Dismas Mukua, who is a political analyst. Tonight's discussion, of course, touching on matters elections, IEBC's scorecard. And I just want to remind you to make sure you get yourself a copy of the Standard tomorrow. The very interesting story on the front page, the headline reading there, Killing the Mara, and the story touching on the Masai Mara, undisputably Kenya's crown jewel is facing its most serious assault in decades. Just in case you want to find out more about why this is the case with the Mara, just get yourself a copy of tomorrow's Standard. This story is in pages 4 and 5. And not forgetting, there's, of course, much more in the Standard newspaper tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. My sign language interpreter tonight has been Philip Omondi, and my name is Leangare. Have a good night and God bless.